With the sort of frictions that seem to exist in the Conservative Party at the moment, I'm not sure that Mr. Hunt's budget is even going to get through, and that would mean a general election immediately. So Mr. Hunt has said that he wants to gradually reduce the trade barriers between Britain and Europe. But Steve Barclay, on the other hand, this morning on Laura Thingamy's television programme, said that his sole focus was on the massive opportunity of Brexit and using the newfound freedoms to drive economic growth. Well, I don't see what they are. And when asked, whether this Mr. Hunt story was true, he said, well, no, I certainly don't recognise that story. And as Brexit secretary, he said he wanted autonomy. And it sort of all rings like, it all rings false. It sounds like people in the cabinet are simply not singing from the same hymn sheet. One of the things that we want to do, he said, on the regulatory side is particularly in the high growth areas, so the green area deal, digital financial services within my own sector, life sciences, is to use that regulatory autonomy in those high grown areas as a massive opportunity. Well, I don't quite see what that massive opportunity actually is. And Mr. Hunt's proposal seems quite sound, except his budget is quite extraordinary. As I've said before, it was theatrically very assured, but it's not, when people look at it and when people study it, and particularly when Conservatives study it and look at it, it's a little bit of sleight of hand. And it's quite, well, it's not really a Conservative budget. It's a budget which is squeezing those few machines of wealth generation that still exist. And yet at the same time, it's using the language of austerity, and it's using the language of prudence, but it doesn't seem to be producing enough. And yet at the same time, Mr. Barclay talks about the huge opportunities that this autumn statement and that Brexit offer for the UK. So I don't really see how that can actually be the case. It doesn't seem to make very much sense to me. This fellow, Steve Barclay, who's the health secretary, went on later to speak on Sky News to a person called Sophie Ridge. And he said that there are areas where there have been difficulties in terms of greater friction, and we're looking to work constructively with EU partners on that. But equally, there are very significant opportunities as a result of Brexit. So presumably, between doing his BBC interview and doing the Sky interview, he seems to have read some of the emails that must have been flowing in his direction. But it doesn't seem to be very clear. Doesn't seem very clear at all. It seems to me that there's a lot of infighting and a lot of uncertainty. And I think that Rishi Sunak is going to have to work very hard to bring his party together and get the budget passed. Very hard indeed. And at the same time, Boris and Liz Truss have added to his problems by effectively green-lighting for Keir Starmer the reform, well, the complete overhaul of the House of Lords, and as I've said before, I think the chances of holding on to the Union in the next 10 years are almost zero. So we have almost certainly a change in government within the next 2 years. We have almost certainly the loss of the House of Lords, and serious constitutional change, and we have almost certainly the loss of Ireland, followed by the loss of Scotland, unless somebody can actually sort out the Northern Ireland Protocol and allow Chris Heaton-Harris to finish his job, which I think is going to be highly unlikely. There's too much messing around and not enough focus on unity and not enough focus on actually getting the job done. As for Brexit, I've said continually that we need to play the hand that we've been dealt. And while I may not like Brexit, I think the attempt to get Brexit done was appalling and was such a drawn-out, sluggish process that it gave every opportunity to Europe to dictate the terms in which Brexit was achieved. And more than that, the important issues like Northern Ireland and migration were not considered or discussed at all. This was an opportunity. If Europe and Britain didn't like the asylum agreements in existence, this was an opportunity for those to be discussed. This was an opportunity to discuss the options available for Northern Ireland. Instead, everything was dictated by Brussels to make this as difficult as possible and as restricted as possible. And in return, our unenlightened masters failed utterly to offer Brussels anything of substance. There were many things that we could have sat down and spent time looking at. Instead, we spent more time navel-gazing, because that seems to be what our current government does best. Navel-gazing, and it did a lot of that most of this year.